Chosen one, the silence you maintained was never a sign of defeat. It was the quiet before a divine strike. While they sat smugly in their own darkness, believing they had escaped the consequences of their lies, the truth was slowly rotting beneath their feet. The moment of reckoning has arrived because your words came back and cut them so bad. They've made a donkey of themselves in front of the very people they tried to deceive. It did not start with a dramatic confrontation. It never does with people like this. It started with a feeling, a quiet one, the kind that lives just beneath your ability to fully explain it. Something in a conversation landed wrong. An energy shifted the moment you arrived somewhere. A response from someone was just slightly too casual, too rehearsed, too ready for a moment that should not have required preparation. You noticed. That is the thing about you. You noticed, not because you are paranoid, but because you are precise. Your perception was built for exactly this kind of situation. You are the kind of person who reads a pause the way other people read a sentence. You know, not suspect, not wonder, but know when something beneath the surface is moving. So when the signals started coming in, you did not spiral. You observed, you filed things away with the quiet patience of someone who understands that clarity rewards those who do not rush it. You watched how certain people asked how you were doing, not because they cared about the answer, but because they were checking the instrument to see what it was registering. You noticed who seemed to know things they had no legitimate reason to know. You noticed how certain people flinched just slightly when you said something specific, and then recovered a little too quickly, like someone remembering to look neutral, and then you started doing what they feared most. You started connecting, not dramatically, not obsessively, just steadily. You looked at one event and then another conversation, at one out-of-context comment from someone with no business in the situation, and at the silence from someone who never used to go quiet, and you started to see a shape emerge, not a random collection of awkward moments, a pattern with a center and a source. You found the connection. Everything attached to it became visible, and somewhere on the other side of that discovery, someone felt the shift. While you were minding your business, building what you were building, showing up as yourself every day, someone had already decided that you were a problem to be managed. Not confronting you directly would have meant dealing with your truth directly. And your truth is sharp. It has always been sharp. Anyone who has ever been on the wrong end of your clarity knows exactly what that feels like. So instead of facing you, that person built a quiet structure around you, a system designed to accomplish one specific thing, to make sure that when your truth eventually surfaced, nobody around you would be positioned to receive it. It started with your reputation, not with facts, but with framings. Nobody outright said you lied. They said you were the kind of person who might. Nobody said you were wrong. They said you were the kind of person who sometimes misread things. There was no direct accusation, just seeds. Small, consistent, strategic seeds planted in the minds of people around you, people who trusted the source, people who then started looking at you just a little differently, without being able to explain why, without being able to point to anything specific, because nothing specific was ever actually said. It was all atmosphere, it was all tone, it was the slow accumulation of a well-placed suggestion, repeating itself over time, and this operation did not run alone. Let that land, chosen one. This was never a solo act. There was a main architect, the designer of the whole thing, and then there were the people who got recruited. Some of them knew exactly what they were participating in. Others were fed only enough information to play their assigned role, without asking too many questions. And then there were the strategic gossip carriers, the ones who would sit directly in front of your face, playing supportive and neutral, asking how you were doing, while quietly feeding everything you said back to the source, and dripping just enough manufactured confusion into your world to keep you second-guessing your own instincts. You know that feeling? Someone asks you a question, and something about it is too specific, too loaded. It feels like the answer is already known, and what is actually being measured is which version you give. You would finish certain conversations feeling more disoriented than when they started, not because the exchange itself was confusing, but because it was designed to leave you that way. That disorientation was not a side effect, it was the entire goal. Fog was being manufactured specifically for you, because fog slows a chosen one down. It does not stop you, but it slows you, and slow was all they needed. The reason they worked so hard to make you look like you were imagining things, the reason the conspiracy theorist label mattered so intensely to them, is because what you were actually detecting was real, not just messy behavior, not just someone navigating poorly through an uncomfortable situation. What you were detecting was a deliberate, coordinated effort to position you unfavorably in the eyes of people who mattered. The goal was to quietly close opportunities before you could reach them, and to ensure that when anything eventually came to light, your credibility would already be compromised. Think about how far ahead someone has to be operating to run a discrediting campaign before they have even done the thing they need to discredit you for. That is premeditation. That is someone who already knew they were going to do something they would eventually need to explain away, and who decided that the cleanest solution was to turn you into an unreliable narrator before the story even began. You needed to look unstable before you had any reason to be upset. You needed to look like someone who saw threats everywhere before the actual threat was even visible. The people around you needed to have already mentally filed you as dramatic before you had anything dramatic to report. That is a designed operation, and the person who designed it was terrified of exactly one thing: your mouth, your clarity, your ability to name precisely what you see, because they understood before you fully understood that if you ever assembled a clear enough picture and put it into words that other people could follow, the consequences for everything they were protecting would be catastrophic. If this message aligned with your purpose, hype this video so fellow chosen ones can find their confirmation. So the entire strategy was built around neutralizing your words before they could land, making your precision sound like obsession, making your insight sound like noise. But here is the thing that no design can override. Your words do not need an audience in order to be true. And truth, given enough time, always creates its own audience. Every word you spoke into that fog is now surfacing with evidence attached. Everything that got dismissed is now being confirmed in the most undeniable way possible. And the person who built an entire campaign around discrediting your voice, that voice is the one nobody is listening to right now. That is the specific, exquisite poetry of what is happening. Your words cut them right at the source of their entire strategy. Every day you delay the truth itself gets heavier. Every day a lie holds, the weight of what is buried underneath it compounds. And when a structure depends on multiple lies, all holding simultaneously, each one relying on every other not cracking, you are not sitting on a foundation, you are sitting on a house of cards in a windstorm, pretending the air is still. Buying time was the entire strategy. Once they felt you getting close, delay, distract, confuse. Take an unreasonable amount of time to answer a simple question, not because of a busy schedule, but because that much time was genuinely needed to coordinate a consistent story with every person who had already been given a different version of it. Think about what that coordination actually requires. Think about how many behind-the-scenes conversations have to happen before a single question gets answered. The aligning, the coaching, the careful deciding of who gets which version of events. That is not someone responding to life as it comes. That is someone running a full operation, and operations of that complexity always leave a trail, not because the person running them is careless, but because complexity itself creates evidence. Every person pulled into the coordination became a potential fracture point. Every distributed version of events became a liability the moment those people started comparing what they had each been told. The assumption holding the whole thing together was that everyone given a different piece of the story would stay in their lane and never end up in the same conversation. That assumption was the single biggest miscalculation of the entire operation. Because people talk, they always talk. Eventually, you were not frantically working to expose anything. You were simply continuing to exist, speaking clearly, moving with integrity, being consistent, and the contrast between your steadiness and their constant scrambling was building a case all by itself. Every time they rushed to patch a crack, every time the story needed another recruited voice, every time an answer got delayed far past any reasonable explanation, they were documenting their own guilt in real time without any help from you. The trap was always going to close. They just kept building it larger. Chosen ones, they never expected this, and they really didn't expect us to keep talking. You've noticed it. Chosen one channels disappearing, videos pulled, voices scrubbed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us. But we will not give up our voice, and now we have something they truly can't: silence. The technology used to suppress consciousness has been reverse-engineered, and Destiny Engine is the result. What was once used against humanity is now your ascension weapon. Join Destiny Engine, and you're supporting your favorite channels while leveling up yourself at the same time. It's a 360 win. You can now MK Ultra yourself into 5D superpowers. Destiny Engine bypasses the conscious mind and rewrites the source code directly. Reality bends faster. Synchronicities stack. Your nervous system upgrades to a higher bandwidth. Put on headphones, press play. That's all. For $1, you switch sides of history. Click the link in the description. The takeover is internal. The most damaging moves happened quietly. They came through messages that were just slightly off in tone. They came through exchanges where the words looked completely fine, but the underlying energy was functioning as a weapon. You felt it every single time. You felt that particular sting of something that appeared to be normal communication, but was really a deliberate provocation. It was said in a way that could be denied if you called it out, but you both knew exactly what it meant. That is calculated passive aggression, and it was chosen specifically because it is difficult to document. It is hard to show someone else and explain why it lands the way it does. It is hard to prove without sounding like you are overreacting, which is precisely why it was the chosen method. It was designed to keep you triggered and off balance while the source maintained complete deniability. You stopped reacting. You started saving. You started keeping a record, not out of vindictiveness, but out of the quiet discipline of someone who has learned to trust their own perception enough to document what it registers. And that record, when laid out in full sequence, when seen as the sustained pattern it always was, rather than as a collection of isolated misunderstandings, tells a story that no one can dismiss. What it reveals is not one ugly message. It reveals a campaign, extended, deliberate, and passive-aggressive, designed to keep you destabilized, while the source maintained the appearance of innocence. Now that the full picture is in front of people, it is clear that what you described was not sensitivity on your part. It was accuracy. Your words cut because your words were a map, and the map was right. There is a figure in all of this that most people overlook. Not the architect, not the ones who were visibly recruited, the one who simply watched. This person had access to the full picture, not fragments, not second-hand rumors, the complete and unambiguous truth of what was being done and by whom. And every single day, a choice was made. Every day that person chose to say nothing, to keep a comfortable position, to let your clarity be sacrificed in exchange for their own personal security. This was not the silence of someone who was afraid or genuinely caught between competing loyalties. This was the silence of someone who was getting something out of watching, a quiet satisfaction, a private sense of power that comes from being the only one who holds the full picture while everyone else navigates in the dark. This was a spectator who enabled the entire performance simply by choosing, over and over again, never to interrupt it. You felt this person's energy as consistently off. You could never fully name it because the neutral and supportive role was performed well enough to pass a casual inspection, but that part of you that has genuinely never been wrong kept registering a note. This person knows more than they are saying, and their comfort level with this situation is far too high for someone with no involvement. The silence they relied on as protection is becoming the very thing that implicates them. When a full account surfaces, and it is surfacing, the question is not only what someone did, the question is also what someone knew, and precisely when they knew it. And this person's answer to that question is not a comfortable one. They knew before things reached their worst, and they said nothing through every stage of it. The alliance they believed was their insurance is no longer holding. The architect at the center protects one person when everything closes in, and that person is always themselves. This silent witness placed their entire safety on the loyalty of someone who has never been loyal to anyone but their own survival. That bet is coming due. The people who were recruited, the ones handed partial information and positioned to treat your name as suspect, to co-sign the narrative, to carry the conspiracy theorist framing into spaces where it would stick, those people are now in their own very specific crisis. Here is what it does to a person when they discover they were never a partner or a confidant in something real. They were an instrument. They were picked up, aimed in your direction, and set back down once their usefulness expired. The information they received was never complete. It was carefully curated, just enough to make them useful, and not enough to make them a liability. And now the complete picture is sitting directly in front of them. Now they are doing the math. The math is ugly. Every cosign, every nod, every time they carried the narrative into a space where it could do the most damage, all of it was built on a lie they were fed. They were not participants in something legitimate. They were props in a performance. And that performance is now being reviewed under the harshest possible light. Some of them are furious. Some of them are pulling back so fast they are leaving marks on the way out. And the more perceptive ones are doing something the architect absolutely did not plan for. They are speaking not to protect you, but to protect themselves. They are getting out in front of their own involvement before someone else gets to define their role for them. That is the moment an operation unravels from the inside, not because of external pressure, but because the people inside it start calculating their own exits. And self-preservation is the most reliable force in any human situation. Your words broke the foundation, holding the whole structure together. What you are watching now is everything built on that foundation coming down. Something concrete surfaced. Feel the full weight of that word, concrete. Not a feeling, not an interpretation, not something that requires a particular angle or a certain amount of goodwill to understand. Something that simply exists independently of anyone's narrative, a record, a message, a direct comparison of accounts that could not, under any honest examination, both be true at the same time. When that evidence was placed beside the carefully constructed narrative, beside everything that had been maintained so expensively and defended so aggressively, the gap between the two was not subtle. It was a canyon. That kind of gap only exists when someone has been lying deliberately, consistently, and with architectural precision. The right people saw it, and the wave started moving. A wave does not ask for permission to move. It does not pause to allow anyone to prepare. It simply moves through one conversation, and then another, through one relationship, and then the next. Every person it reaches receives the same information, and with each exchange, the weight of what is collectively known grows heavier, while the structure of the lie grows weaker and weaker beneath it. The architect felt the moment it began, and they did exactly what they always do when control starts slipping. They got louder, they pushed harder on the explanations, they reached back out to everyone they had ever recruited, and tried to reinforce the story. They attempted to get ahead of something that had already moved completely past them. But explaining yourself after the truth is already in circulation only makes things worse. Every explanation becomes additional evidence of the pattern. Every defense reveals just how practiced the deception has been over time. Every attempt to reframe the situation confirms that reframing is not a reaction to this specific moment. It is a way of operating. It always has been. And then, and this is the part that is almost poetic, the people who had been pulled in started turning. Not because you reached out to any of them, not because anyone coordinated a response to the architect, simply because those people were now fielding questions themselves. Their names were attached to the story. They were the ones holding the consequences of someone else's choices, and they were done carrying that weight. They offered what looked like a confession. It was a carefully worded, strategically vague statement designed to resemble accountability without actually containing any. It gestured at wrongdoing without naming the wrong. It carried the tone of remorse while carefully avoiding any specific mention of what there was actually to be remorseful about. It was an apology engineered to close the conversation without settling a single part of the debt. You know exactly what that sounds like. You may have even received one personally. It is the kind of sorry that really means, I am sorry this situation is becoming inconvenient for me right now. It is the kind that lands and somehow leaves you feeling worse than you did before it was offered. It is the kind that the people around the architect were supposed to accept and then use as a reason to say, well, they apologized, and treat that as grounds to shut down any further discussion. But a half-confession when the receipts are already in circulation does not land as accountability. It lands as confirmation. A genuinely innocent person does not offer strategically vague remorse. They give a clear and specific denial. A person with nothing to hide does not gesture at wrongdoing in carefully measured doses. They explain exactly what happened. The choice to stay deliberately foggy in what was supposed to be a moment of honesty tells every observant person exactly what is still being protected underneath the surface. The people who had been extending the benefit of the doubt, the ones willing to believe that missing context might exist somewhere, got their answer, not from the words of the statement, but from the shape of it, from what it refused to say, from the specific gaps where truth was supposed to appear and did not. The person at the center of all of this is not someone who was hurt and reacted badly. They are not someone who got scared and made a few poor decisions under pressure. This is someone who operates from habitual, cold calculation, who processes other people the way a chess player processes pieces, entirely in terms of what can be extracted and what needs to be managed. Empathy exists in this person's toolkit only as a performance, and when the performance slips, when you catch a glimpse of what actually sits underneath it, what you find is cold, detached in a way that registers no guilt and no genuine remorse, only threat level and strategic response. This is why the gaslighting was so consistent. Most people, when they are genuinely doing harm to someone, have moments where the discomfort of it surfaces, a hesitation, a visible crack in the delivery. Not this person. This person could observe your pain, pain they caused, pain they monitored closely as a performance metric, and process it as nothing more than data. Is it working? Is this still serving the strategy? What adjustment needs to be made? You felt it every time. You felt that subtle wrongness, that particular sensation of engaging with a mask rather than an actual person, that strange unexplainable exhaustion after interactions that by every external measure should have felt completely neutral. You were not imagining any of it. This collapse was not one mistake. It was a sequence of escalating decisions, and each one was made worse by the specific quality of ego that refused to stop driving them. The first failure was overcomplication. A simpler lie is harder to catch. A smaller operation involves fewer people, and therefore fewer points where things can break. But simple was never a real option here, because the same ego that drove the targeting of you in the first place also demanded that the strategy be sophisticated, that it reflect a self-image as a master architect of situations. So instead of something manageable, something elaborate was constructed, and elaborate things always carry elaborate failure modes that their creators refuse to see in advance. The second failure was refusing to stop. Multiple times throughout this situation, natural exit points existed. There were moments where pulling back would have been the rational choice, where letting things settle would have protected everyone still involved in the operation. Instead, every opening became an invitation to push further. Every opportunity to quietly wind things down became an opportunity to expand. The control was no longer a strategy at that point. It was a compulsion. And compulsions do not stop when stopping would be smart. They stop when the wall arrives and there is nowhere left to go. The third failure was believing their own construction. This is the one that sealed the outcome. At a certain point, the person running the operation genuinely began to believe the version of events they had built. They started actually buying into the idea that you were the problem, that they were the reasonable one, and that history would eventually validate them. When you believe your own lie completely, you lose the ability to sense how close the truth is to breaking through. You stop receiving warning signals. You are so fully inside the performance that you cannot see the audience quietly walking away. When the concrete evidence finally surfaced, there was no contingency plan, because a contingency had never been prepared. It had never been believed to be necessary. That is the precise anatomy of a donkey. Not just someone who did wrong, but someone who did wrong, then scaled it, refused every available off-ramp, convinced themselves of their own righteousness throughout the process, and then registered genuine shock when the consequence arrived. All the toilet tissue in the world cannot absorb that level of self-inflicted damage. This is no longer contained within the original situation. It has moved beyond the inner circle. It is sending a wave through communities, through families, through networks, the kind of wave that makes people go quiet mid-sentence, the kind that lands in shared conversations and sits there unanswered for an uncomfortable stretch while everyone figures out what it means for their own position, the kind that changes which version of events people are willing to publicly stand behind going forward. People are being confronted with information they were not prepared to receive about someone they believed they understood completely, and the particular anger that comes with that realization is not simple. It includes anger at the architect, but it also includes anger at themselves for having been used as instruments. It includes anger at the time and energy they invested, and it includes anger at the voice they chose not to listen to, yours that was telling them the truth the entire time. The architect now sits at the center of that collective anger with nowhere left to redirect it. You cannot be blamed cleanly anymore because you are vindicated. The people who are now turning cannot be blamed because they were used. Circumstance cannot be blamed because this was deliberate, and everyone can now see that clearly. The only available recipient for all of that consequence is the person who engineered every piece of it. And accountability is entirely new territory for someone who has spent their whole operation carefully avoiding it. They are experiencing a version of reality they never once designed a response for, because the possibility of this specific outcome never felt real to them. When a fog this dense finally lifts, when a manufactured confusion that has been deliberately maintained over your life with that much focused, sustained energy finally clears, the things that were being blocked by it start to move. Opportunities that were being quietly rerouted around you start finding their way back. Connections that were being slowly poisoned before they could become what they were meant to become start healing. Recognition that was being redirected away from you starts landing where it always should have. And there are people who have been watching from a respectful distance, not the gossip carriers, not the ones running information back to the source, but people who sensed something genuinely real in you that they could not fully move toward while the noise was at its loudest. These are people who intuited that the version of you circulating in the manufactured narrative was not the true one. These are people who are drawn specifically to the quality of someone who keeps moving with integrity even when the entire environment is working against them. Those people are drawing closer now. They feel the shift. They can see the confirmation unfolding, and there is something undeniably magnetic about a chosen one standing squarely inside their own proven truth. That is domination, not the loud kind, but the permanent kind, the kind that cannot be undone, because it is not built on circumstances, it is built on character, and character does not move. They made a complete donkey of themselves. Every strategy they designed, every ally they recruited, every lie they maintained past any reasonable point, every stall tactic, every passive-aggressive provocation, every performance of innocence, every attempt to reframe the situation, every hollow apology that answered nothing, every effort to turn observers against you, all of it came back, boomerang energy, and this one had a serrated edge, straight to the throat, deep, and you did not even have to swing, you just kept telling the truth. And your truth did every single bit of the work. They called you a conspiracy theorist. They laughed about it. They turned it into a shorthand. They used in every conversation with every person they recruited, as though your truth were a punchline, as though your clarity were a condition that needed managing, as though the connections you were drawing were imaginary rather than a direct and accurate map to everything they were working to protect. And now every single person who was handed that shorthand is holding it in one hand and holding the evidence in the other. The match is exact. Everything you named is surfacing in the exact form you described it, and the silence coming from the people who laughed the loudest. That silence is the sound of reckoning. That is the sound of every person who chose a lie over your truth, now sitting with the full, undiminished weight of that choice. Your words had a return date stamped on them from the very beginning, when you were speaking clearly into spaces that were not yet ready to receive what you were saying. When truth felt like it was dissolving the moment it left your mouth, it was not dissolving, it was building. It was collecting weight and gathering evidence. It was making its way into the permanent record, into the memory of everyone who heard it, into the instincts of everyone who dismissed it, sitting patiently in the awareness of everyone who chose not to believe it yet. Your words were an investment, and the return on that investment just came in. Everything they tried to bury you with has buried them instead. So stand up straight, roll your shoulders back, look at everything that is unfolding, and understand that this was always the destination from the first moment you felt something was off, from the first moment you chose to trust your own knowing instead of the fog they manufactured around you, from the first moment you decided your truth was worth holding, even when no one around you was ready to hold it with you. They are scrambling, you are standing, they are desperate, you are clear, they are watching everything come apart. You are watching everything confirm. The potato rotted, the light found it, and now the whole house knows the smell. You called it from the very beginning, and from this side it does not feel like revenge. It does not feel like aggression. It feels like quiet, iron-spined, unbothered, completely earned dominion. That is yours, always was.